Okay, so to start, I just want everyone to picture yourself being back in the clinic, and you're going throughout your day. You see you have an eval coming up in the afternoon. So at lunchtime, you go to prepare. You open the folder, and you see you have a 30-year-old male patient who's a factory worker, and he's coming in with low back pain of insidious onset. He's also an amateur wrestler, and as you continue reading, you see that he also is receiving workers' compensation. So just by a quick show of hands, how many of you have had the opportunity to treat a patient who's been on workers' compensation? So yeah, what we expected. It's really common, making it an important thing to prepare yourself to treat when you're out in the clinic. So you're in your eval, you may use a form like this, a McKenzie form, to guide you through your low back eval, but unconsciously, either through your own past experiences or stories from your CI or reports you see in the media, some biases may interrupt your form. Things like, oh, here we go again, they're lazy, they're not going to try hard, they're just here because they have to be. Let's see if we can figure out if this guy's malingering, trying to get some benefits. And so as this visualizes, these biases literally get in the way of your evaluation, and you have no room to fill in some of the info that you need, and it disrupts your clarity. And so instead of searching for the info that could guide the rest of your eval, you're now looking for things to see if he's malingering or trying to see if he's faking it. So Alex is now going to talk about a patient that he had the opportunity to work with and how these biases can play a role in a PT eval, and how it's important to try to go into these evals with a clean sheet.
So the patient Andrew was describing is the patient I had in the clinic at my last clinical. So the patient was a 30-year-old male who was a factory worker, came in with low back pain. When he first came in the first day, he was late to the appointment. When he came in the back during the eval and gave us his intake form, there were lots of spelling errors on basic words, so we had a lower educational status. During the evaluation, whatever we did, whatever palpations we did, any movements we did, everything hurt. Nothing was really different than anything else. And again, one of his goals besides getting back to work was being able to go back to amateur wrestling, kind of like a mini WWE outside of Oswego, New York. So after we come out of the eval, my CI is talking to me, and we're trying to come up with a home exercise plan to give him after the first day. My CI just tells me just to give him the basic thing and don't really tailor it to him, because who knows if he's actually going to do it anyway. The next day, we come in and we see his name on the schedule. My CI rolls and scrolls over his name and says, oh, look, we might have a break here today because this patient might not show up. He only met this man once, all based on the bias because he had workers' compensation. So he did come into the clinic, and we started our plan of care. We gave him some exercises that we thought would work. If anything caused more pain or he couldn't do them, we kind of just skipped it. Instead of trying to change the exercise to tailor it more towards him, we just kind of skipped it and performed some iatrogenesis to try and, because we weren't giving him optimal treatment and the best that he could. Also, after being with my CI these 2 times, I felt that I started to develop some learned bias. Just because my CI felt these biases towards him, he had more experience than me, he's been there around longer than me. So I felt that maybe these biases are true. Looking back on this, I know that these are not true. After a couple visits, this patient was really motivated and really tried the hardest. It did start to get better by the time I was leaving. Also, looking back on this, so doing better. And also this picture, I know it's a little funny, but I wanted it to be funny for a reason. So it looked like this because this is how a lot of people look like when they see their workers' comp patients. They see a person who they're not going to take seriously. You wouldn't take this guy seriously in a unitard out in the middle of the desert. So we really want you to believe your patients, and they're not all faking or malingering, as Dave's going to talk about.
All right, so this doesn't always happen just in the PT clinic. It's in the healthcare profession and also in the public as general. People are always talking about, oh, I'm paying for that guy to sit at his house and just get a paycheck from his work, and he's not doing anything. He's always hurt, hasn't worked a day in his life. So here's just some statistics, some numbers up there. So $5 billion, that's what the American Federation of Labor estimated the workers' comp money that was responsible for workers' comp fraud. There was actually a study that kind of looked at these numbers more in depth. Lee et al. Did a study to look at how much money was actually a result of fraud and not just from the workers' comp, and they found that it was actually only $1.2 billion, or 1 to 2% of the total amount of workers' compensation money that was a result of fraud. There was a study in 2000 that looked at state to state as far as workers' compensation fraud, and they found that 0.3% in California was the actual number of workers' compensation fraud in the total, and then in Wisconsin, 0.1% of the workers' compensation money was a result of fraud. So as you can see, this whole belief that everybody's faking, that everybody's just trying to get their money and trying not to work is definitely false. 0.3% is very little, and really doesn't work into the total workers' compensation that everybody believes. PBS did a little research on workers' comp as well, and they found they were kind of looking at the costs that each injured person who's on workers' compensation actually pays, and they found that 44% of the cost was actually had to be taken as a burden onto the injured person or the injured person's family. So not everything is covered, and it's not just like I go in, all my PT visits are taken, my medical visits are all taken care of. They actually had to take 44% of the cost of all their medical bills. So this belief that it's just a free way to get a vacation and you don't have to worry about anything. They went on to talk about a Tosco employee where there was actually a fire in the building, and he was on the 3rd floor, and he actually had to jump out of the building to get away from the fire. There was no way else for him to leave, and sustained multiple lower extremity fractures. So he was on workers' compensation, and they kind of just looked at his paycheck, and they saw that before the injury, he was getting paid about $1,000 a week from the company. From the workers' compensation benefits, he was only getting paid about $500. So that's a 50% pay cut in his weekly wage that he now has to use as the sole provider for his family and the only income that's coming into the house. They also looked at if you weren't 100% disabled, so 100% disabled means that you aren't able to return to work in any type of capacity because of your injury. They found if you weren't 100% disabled, this specific employee would have only received about $250. So that's a 75% pay cut. So again, he's trying to live off of 75% less money while he's on workers' compensation. So we need to look at this where we can't have a bias towards all these patients that they're just getting all this money to sit around, they're just going to try and wait this out for as long as possible, because this can be a big motivator for our patients that because they're not receiving that big paycheck, they need to get back to work as soon as possible. And really, we need to use that motivation to help them get better and not allow this bias to allow us to just kind of float on by and not do proper interventions.
So much like we've all talked about, overcoming this bias is very tough. I've treated it, you've treated it. They walk in, you're like, wow, I really don't want to treat this guy. He's going to sit here, do nothing. Everywhere I touch him hurts. And it's difficult, it's very tough. So we wanted to kind of look at how PTs view this in general, the workers' comp population. One article by Johnston looked at, there was a qualitative study that looked at how PTs view themselves in return to work situation, and most PTs felt they had a large role in return to work situations, but novice therapists, us, are very uncomfortable with that. We're not very comfortable making that decision. We don't have the experience. We don't know if this person's actually faking it or if they're going to send it back. So that directly relates to us. Next time we go on our next clinical, when we're out on our own, we're going to need to seek advice from older therapists, get their experiences with these types of patients, and understand ways to improve our own abilities. The other article by Beatty, it was it looked at the total units and treatments billed by certain different types of physical therapy clinics, outpatient ortho hospitals, and other situations, and it showed that large corporate chain physical therapy clinics are more likely to bill for more units and treatments, but they're also more likely to use evidence-based techniques as opposed to other clinics. So that, again, this goes to us if we go out on a clinical to a large NovaCare or anything like that, our CIs may be holding on to these patients because they see them as the pay-the-rent patients, but they're more likely to use some evidence-based techniques, so maybe educating smaller clinics that these techniques may provide longer-lasting benefits. So more importantly, getting over these types of barriers is educating yourself and others. Performing those self-assessments, understanding why you're treating this patient this way, and ways you can improve it, like what worked well with one patient, what didn't work well with another's. And then if you work for an older CI who may be stuck in that rut, talking to them, saying, hey, can I try this with this patient? Maybe let me try talking to them. Understanding them personally can really help. Building that therapeutic alliance and that rapport with your patients is the most essential. Getting to know them on a personal level, understanding how this disability is affecting them not only at work but at home, understanding their specific impairments and what you can do to tailor therapy more to benefit them, and just using those active listening skills and the client-centered approach, you can really get to know the patient and really treat them the most optimal. So we kind of take this upon you guys. Next time you guys go out and you get that workers' comp patient, just based on statistics alone, they probably aren't faking it. So don't just go in with that bias. Don't see those words that we threw up at the front. See the blank sheet. Get to know your patient and understand ways to improve them so you can truly help them. Thank you.